Now, when you talk about Andrew Cuomo, a lot of focus has been put on his sexual harassment allegations, and for good reason. Now, we have a report from the Attorney General that is still expected and is on the way, and that's going to do a lot of the storytelling as to how this thing ends. But I will tell you this, one thing I know for certain. He's been accused of all sorts of terrible things, but let me tell you one thing I know for certain. Andrew Cuomo doesn't care.
There is a legal definition of harassment that is very clear. All I was saying is just uncomfortable does not mean sexual harassment. You make me uncomfortable by some of the questions you ask me. That is not sexual harassment. There are other elements that also have to be added. Intimate has a number of manifestations. I think we have an intimate relationship. Don't you think that? Yeah. Not a sexual relationship. No. Made you uncomfortable with that question, didn't I?
He made another person uncomfortable. Now, you see, the reason that's funny is because it makes light of all the women he's been groping. Now that you know the context, isn't it hilarious? But despite all of the handsy escapades of Governor Cuomo, I think the bigger issue just might be the thousands of murders of old people he's responsible for. Maybe it's just me. For months, the real numbers of victims of Cuomo's policies were known to him, but hidden by him. The same could be said about his compensation for his viscerally repulsive book, How to Enrich Yourself by Murdering Grandparents. Technically, that was actually the working title. The final title was American Crisis. Here it is. That now, I will say, American Crisis, pretty good title for this. It not only describes the book, but also a good description of what he unleashed on the nation during the last year. Before we actually sort of received the truth from the endlessly corrupt Cuomo about his cash for disease scheme, he had to first make sure people weren't listening. So predictably, he used distraction. Quote, hours before the release of the figures, Mr. Cuomo made a series of major pandemic-related announcements. Including the end of most mask mandates in the state for vaccinated New Yorkers, the loosening of capacity restrictions on businesses, and the return of the New York City Marathon and the Tribeca Film Festival. Wow! I guess the science just supported that change in policy a few hours before his announcement. He was just following the science, right? The science just said that this science should be announced as a distraction before an embarrassing admission, right? That's how the science works. So what was the announcement? For his horrible scam of a book, Cuomo received $5.12 million. $5.12 million. You might say he made $5.12 million for nothing, but that's not fair. His book was far worse than nothing. If only he had done nothing, nursing homes would have just said, actually, we're not going to accept COVID positive patients because our other residents are going to get sick. That would have saved lives. Nothing would have been much better than Cuomo. Literally having no governor at all would have been far superior to having someone who seemed intent to eliminate the entire population north of 65 years old. $5.12 million. Now, you might not be in the business of ending the lives of innocent people for profit, so you might not realize how much money this is for a book these days. But almost no one makes this kind of cash for a book in the year 2021. According to the New York Times, across the publishing world, the revelation of Mr. Cuomo's payment elicited shock. The amount appeared to be a staggering sum to pay a politician who already had a meager sales record for his previous book, a memoir that sold just a few thousand print copies. Remember, we're talking about $5.12 million. In fact, even if you take away $1.12 million from that total, it's still completely insane. How do we know that? Well, it was initially reported that Cuomo earned $4 million for the book. Here's how the left-wing magazine The New Republic covered it. Why would anyone pay Andrew Cuomo $4 million for a book? Remember, that's a lot of money for any author. But Cuomo is quite possibly the worst single author in the history of words. Quote, 7 years ago, on the eve of being elected to a second term as governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo completed a rite of passage familiar to all presidential aspirants. He published a memoir, All Things Possible. It's overlong at more than 550 pages, cliché-ridden, and hopelessly dull, which is to say, it's a standard issue political tome. Cuomo was paid more than $700,000 in advance by HarperCollins, and the book had announced an initial print run of $200,000. But 5 months after it was published, it had sold just over 3,000 copies in hardcover and 13 audiobooks. Even by the dismal standards of the subgenre of books by politicians, this was a flop. Based on a conservative estimate of the governor's advance, Cuomo earned about $200 for every hardcover sold. I don't even know. He sold 13 audiobooks total. Like not 13,000, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. That's it. They had to pay Cuomo $200 per book. I can't describe to you how crazy that is. It is a catastrophe in every single way. When that happens to you, you never write another book ever again, let alone get a signing bonus. So how did this work out for the company in the new book? Quote, "There's no question that they lost their shirts and that Cuomo was the beneficiary of what can only be characterized as a bad commercial decision," said Mike Shotskin, the founder and chief executive of Ideological, a publishing consultancy. Bad commercial decision is quite the understatement. It's like calling the importation of COVID-positive patients into a nursing home a bad management decision. True, yes, but sort of understating the problem. Quote, "Though more successful than its predecessor, it has sold about 45,000 copies. Ooh. It, too, is a disaster from a sales standpoint. And that was before Cuomo was hit with a cascade of scandals. Its publisher, Crown, stopped promoting it earlier this year. American Crisis even plays a supporting role in one of those scandals. While Cuomo and his aides were at work on the book, they were simultaneously working to undercount nursing home deaths early in the pandemic, according to the Times." And that's an important point. It's not just that the book was bad, which it was. It's not just that the book was a failure, which it most certainly was too. It's that the book itself was a big part of the problem. Quote, "Last summer, top aides to Mr. Cuomo gathered at the governor's mansion with the editors to read from the manuscript, a memoir of the pandemic's first months. The aides, who had been directly involved in the pandemic response, took turns reading passages and commenting on facts in the work, according to 2 people with knowledge of the gathering, which began on a Friday and stretched into the weekend. Fun, fun, fun. The governor also read aloud from the work. So in the same place he was allegedly groping women, he was also forcing them to read his book. I am not sure which one is worse." The craziest part about all of this is not that he may have forced staffers to help with it, which is against the law, or that he completely failed. He's Andrew Cuomo. His life is one gigantic failure after another. The strangest thing is that there is virtually no way this could have succeeded. Industry figures have estimated that Figure assumed sales in the very high 6 figures and possibly over 1 million, an astonishing number, particularly given the disruptions caused by COVID-19. It points to the kind of mania that grips some publishing houses and the bubbles that many executives live in. Cuomo's popularity among a certain set was so profound that the idea that American Crisis could be the kind of book that makes a publishing house's year took hold. Look, we can mock him for selling 5% of expectations, but 50,000 copies of a book from Andrew Cuomo is a literal miracle. Like, that's incredible. He actually outperformed any reasonable expectation by probably 10 times and was still only at 1/20th of breaking even. What the hell is going on? Is this money laundering? It all sounds like the high school kind of athlete that goes into college and then just happens to land a job at the local car wash where he makes $200 an hour and just happens to be owned by a prominent alumni. The New Republic sums up the entire saga very well. It doesn't really matter what Cuomo or his team wrote. The fact that he had aides working on it in the midst of a pandemic that was killing his constituents, while at the same time covering up a death toll, is more damning than anything he or anyone else could have written. Cuomo published a book meant to be a monument to his own political abilities. It's now looking more like a tombstone on his national political career. I mean, actually, he seems to still be running Biden's COVID response, but that's another story. All of this still begs the question, why? Why would you lie about this? Why would you hide the numbers? Why would you have your staff cover them up? Why would you interfere with the scientific reports that told the truth? Why would you torture the families of all of these people who died as a result of your policies? $5.12 million. That's why. Why would you lie about this? $5.12 million. Why would you hide the numbers? $5.12 million. Why would you have your staff cover them up? $5.12 million. Why would you interfere with scientific reports that told the truth? $5.12 million. Why would you torture all of the families of these people who died as a result of your policies? $5.12 million. Andrew Cuomo lied to New York. He lied to America. He lied to your face every single day for months to protect $5.12 million.